but actually people seem to enjoy it. So.
Okay.
Wow.
And I think we are live now. So welcome everybody. It's good to be here again with all of you. Let me, I mean, I don't need to do any introductions here because everyone already know our two guest speakers, and Martin, maybe over to you to a quick question I would normally like to ask at the beginning.
Yeah, it's this is the only gotcha question that we have for our guests. And that is there any little trinket of knowledge that you normally don't share with people, but on this occasion you feel you could share this little piece of yourself that maybe is not very frequently told or maybe not frequently understood or known about you? Anything that just springs to mind.
Correct.
I'm an introvert.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think that's a one piece that many would not expect from me, because I always seem very outgoing, outspoken. Yeah. And in the physical world, I often miss my breakout room button on my little screen. So if I'm invited at private parties, you would find me in the kitchen or cleaning up the dishes just to find something to do.
Okay. Wow. Interesting. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm a deep introvert too, which is, I think, more common than people would expect in facilitators. Like I remember when I met, I don't know if I'm sure you've all met Michael Wilkinson, who has one of the biggest facilitation presences, right? He's just loud and energetic, and then when you talk to him privately, it's so quiet and so contained.
Wow.
And this introvert's need to understand how to make conversations work and to make them safe, I think translates to facilitation really quite nicely.
Super.
And I wonder, maybe already to build the arc to the topic of communities. Yeah. For me personally, I'm not a community, but maybe that's the other piece of information. I don't like communities. So I basically build the only community I would ever want to be part of. And being an introvert, I like to stay on the sidelines. So not to be fully involved, but rather to prepare the ground and the ecosystem. So maybe even there might be more introverts in the community building environment that we would expect.
Yeah, fair. That's Elise, does that chime with your experience?
You know, I can't say really, because I don't visit a lot of communities either. As an introvert, I butterfly through them. I certainly appreciate that communities exist, because I think, especially when it comes to meeting, that isn't something you can learn by yourself, right? You just can't book that one up. So it has to be practiced and embodied, which means we have to have places where we can do that. Whether or not that's true for other communities, I just can't say, unfortunately.
But you've both touched on something really interesting. Our idea of community. So let's take our social media current environment and the concept of friend, and then go back to before we had social media and our concept of friend. And the concept of friend got transformed into virtually, I'd argue and say, it's kind of unrecognizable, at least to me. So my idea of friend does not work with the social media version of friend. So your view of community, I wonder, is there a parallel there, that your sense of community is different to what might be currently commonly understood in our social media environment as community, but I have a suspicion. My instinct is telling me that you are both firmly rooted in community. Is it just a different type or form of community?
Well, for my part, and I would not begin to speak for Myriam, but I imagine there's some overlap. The community building that I appreciate in both of the communities that we enjoy is most evident when we gather. Right, when you're actually looking at people in events and you have this opportunity to have a conversation with another person who might be what we recognize as a friend. Right, like Martin, I've met you and I haven't met either Paul or Myriam, but we've encountered each other enough.
Yeah.
That should we? I think that would not be a problem. Right, we are friends. We're friends. But not because we've commented on each other's posts or hit the like button or anything like that, but it's because we've done this. So I think the social media aspect of it is important for knowledge sharing. It's important for continuity.
Yeah.
It's important for attracting, the right kinds of people to join. Right being, as we've mentioned before, whoever shows up and is willing to play. But
yeah, I can relate to that. And for me, the sense of community also comes from sharing or establishing and building shared identity, shared norms, and lingo.
Yeah.
So the more we interact with each other, the more we align on how we are doing things. Recently, I was in a workshop and I entered the space I wasn't hosting and there was full silence. And I was like, it totally threw me off because this is not what I'm used to. We usually do it differently because we have our community kind of doing things, which is implicit and then might not be recognizable for the outside. So I think for me, this is what makes community. And I would think that it's similar to times before social media, where we had maybe communities through the sports we are playing, the religions we are belonging to, where we come together, we share implicit norms, rituals, lingo.
And has the virtual, do you think, enhanced that, broadened that, made that more accessible, or has it narrowed that? Has it constrained that? Has it limited that? I
think that it both in a sense. It has broadened it in terms of geography and accessibility. Yes. So, and this was maybe not the online and social media, but precisely the pandemic. Yeah. That through the pandemic, we suddenly felt permission to reach out to each other. And therefore, we could even niche down even more. So it is easier to find our tribes. So there are now more facilitation communities around, I would say. And each facilitation community has their own niche and attracts the small group of people who share similar values or ways of being.
Yeah, and Elise, the community that you built around Lucid, the community of scholars, practitioners, facilitators, does that actually exemplify Myriam's point that you built something has almost organically built around the meetings concepts, and now you have a very identifiable community in that working space?
Yes, the meeting innovation community is definitely distinct from the facilitation communities, because it's not focused explicitly on facilitation. That said, it also doesn't have as strong an identity. It's also not as old as some of these other communities, but the identity isn't as strong because it isn't as niched down yet as some of these other groups. So there's that. I mean, I completely agree that you have this opportunity to find people who are attracted in, but as they become attracted in, who settles into the group that actually shows up, that actually contributes, is always a fascinating thing to watch in any community, because it's always a fraction of the number of people who are listed as being members. But one of the things I've found really interesting as I've watched all of our communities develop, is that we have in fact mostly created some fairly strong norms about how we gather. So if you go into an NDB gathering, those mostly start the same way and end the same way. You have a jingle, you have a presence to them. In the MIC, we try to start and end the same way. And voltage controls community, IAF's communities, they all start and end kind of the same way, which in some ways I feel like as a professional development activity, which community also is, this has given us an opportunity to learn from each other and then become farther and farther away from the rest of the world that we go out and serve. Because those things have evolved really quite quickly into some very strong best practices that are not the same but mirrored across all of those landscapes. So it's an interesting challenge for an innovation community where our goal is to not actually be the same all the time. Our goal is to experiment. And it's like, at some point when it works,
Yeah.
Fascinating point, Elise. And I wonder to what extent, so what are the purposes that communities fulfill and why do we feel attracted to communities? And I think these rituals to start the same way and end of the same way is this kind of, it creates this feeling of belonging. And as soon as the jingle plays, or I know that I can show up, and then it's predictable what's going to happen, at least for the first 5 minutes, it gives this feeling of ease. And what happens in between can still be innovative. But I think that one reason why we have communities and not just a series of sessions that start the same way and end the same way is maybe a different purpose than just the professional development and the learning. But it's maybe the substitute for something that used to be a religious community or family, or the things that used to be very strong a few decades ago and still are very strong in some parts of the world, and in many parts they've broken apart.
So the community of practice as the inheritor for the community of place and the community of faith.
And maybe just as the excuse.
At one level, the technology piece superimposed on all that, the technology piece has done two things, hasn't it? It's, on the one hand, I think, Elise, you made the point a little earlier that it enables us, or it drives participants into like-minded groupings. So the technology is designed to do that. But equally, the technology is designed to capture a much wider audience base. So on the one hand, the technology has a shrinking effect, and on the other hand, the same technology has an expanding effect. So is the net result that we just end up with just a much bigger range of communities, but the same basic underlying features of community are what attract us in. So it's the jingles, it's the habitual openings, closings, it's the ceremonial. I use that in the very general sense. So whatever the ceremonies are, the practices, is it a culturally driven thing then? is it about alignment of our personal culture values with like-minded citizens? And now whether it's about meetings or collecting stamps or, you know, looking at insects, now it really doesn't matter. It's about shared and sharing. Is that a kind of a fair summary? Because if it is, I've got a question. If you're too
Bring it on.
agreeing with me, I always get uncomfortable when people agree too readily. So the question then is, so why bother with facilitation? What do we if we got these wonderfully attractive communities, we've got this wonderfully adaptive technology to get us all together, what do we need facilitation for?
Thank you. I love the question. And I have I've joined a few, or I've looked around a few communities, and what I find fascinating is to observe the level of engagement in facilitation communities and non-facilitation communities. So for instance, I am in a community of entrepreneurs, online entrepreneurs, very active asynchronously. So very active on forums, in written, in sharing work and answering questions. Whenever I joined one of the live sessions, be it a question and answer, a office hour, or a workshop, I just wanted to run away. And maybe I showed up once because it made me feel very uncomfortable because it wasn't facilitated. And I think that when you're with a group of facilitators, there are some basic principles of how we can interact with large groups so that it still feels as if you would sit with a small group around a fire. And I think unless you have the skills or you have experienced it, how to make this possible, you simply don't know and think it's normal. So I've been sitting in office hours with 200 people, and whoever has a question types it in the chat, and there's one person going through the questions one by one, and there's basically wasted Zoom capacity. So why would we be with 300 experts? So there are potentially so many new connections for me and so many new friends. And the technology allowed, in principle, for me to connect with each and every one of them. But because of lacking facilitation skills, I was trapped in my little frame on Zoom and restricted to writing a question in the chat. I think that, and that's very sad. And for me, this is not community, but it's called community.
Okay.
I've seen the same thing, and it drives me batty. It drives me absolutely batty, because a lot of the communities, and I'm also in a couple that are about either women-led business ownership, or consultant work, or other kinds of things like that, and they purport to be rising tides. And I believe that both of the communities that Myriam and I lead are about, when people come in, they contribute and they are elevated, and everyone is contributing and elevating, right? Rising tides lift all boats. And you go to those communities and they are promotional. And while there are people who chime in helpfully to other people's questions often, there is no version of it that doesn't end up being dominated by, look at how amazing I am. Look at what I've just launched. Look at how cool this is. And then you get all of these amazing, they truly are clearly amazing people together in these 200-300 person gatherings. And they've done a beautiful job on the design and the lights and all of this stuff. And then you never meet anybody else who could have helped lifted your boat, and you don't get a chance to truly make a contribution. And that is so wasteful. It's so wasteful and so frustrating.
And almost even
so that's why facilitation.
Yes. And I think it's almost disrespectful. And I think what in both our communities and I would say most facilitation communities, and I think it's because of our inherent belief that goes along with our profession. We believe that the wisdom is in the group. Full stop. We are not, it's not about us, it's about the group. And by believing that the wisdom is in the group, by definition, we want to bring the group together because we believe that everyone can learn from everyone else as much as they could learn from me. And I think that this belief is not standard in, for instance, the consulting world or in the entrepreneurial world, because as a matter of fact, these people are brought in because they're subject matter experts. So of course they don't believe that the group knows already, because otherwise they're losing their job.
They know, but they know about their little bit of the jigsaw puzzle, whereas the group knows about the whole jigsaw puzzle. So
besides, I just think it's the coolest thing in the whole world when you invite a random group of people together and then something happens where they build on each other in some way that you could have never predicted. Right? Like that opportunity to sit and watch and help be a part of enabling serendipitous magical emergence is just, it's so fun. It's so fun to see the cool stuff people come up with when they're just invited to do that.
Yeah, and certainly in like what both of you are saying is resonating in a couple of different ways in my head at the minute. I've just noted that one, the skill sets that you're talking about, you could have all the technology in the world that enables people to engage with each other. But the bit that I think both of you are suggesting is that there's a human touch that makes it about the other. I use the other as, it's not about me, the facilitator. It's not about me if I happen to be one of the experts in the community. So the facilitation contribution, A, is human. B, it's about the other party and what they can or can't bring to the party. But then is it about, well, is there a third ingredient in there? Is there something about the group dynamic? Both of you have alluded to that idea. I'm going back, Myriam, you in particular made the point a little bit earlier about the practices, the norms, the openings, the closings. Elise, you reinforce that, particularly about the openings, the closings, which is that's a meetings frame of reference that I can certainly identify with. There's an opening, there's a middle, and there's a closing. So in facilitation of communities, is there another ingredient in there apart from the people, that it's a human touch that's needed, that there's an empathic thing needed? What else? What other ingredients have we got in there that I might be missing? Or is that it?
I think it's a very important ingredient that is, I try to put my finger on it, and I think it's very difficult because it's something like a culture that you establish, and it's an ability that is a mix between respect and curiosity towards each other.
Yeah.
I think the ability to listen and not to interrupt, to yes and what the other person has said instead of just opening another topic. So to really, for what Elise has just explained, the beauty of the magic that happens when a group comes together and builds on each other, this already needs to be designed and is not just magically happening if you put a bunch of people into the same room. Because what might happen is that they start speaking over each other or opening different topics, and then they don't go anywhere. And I think you can promote this by role modeling, by also inducing some sort of vulnerability and openness, that it's okay, that everyone feels safe enough, and by inducing some sparks of curiosity for each other.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, because so it needs design, it needs curiosity, it needs people to be able to go someplace, but logically go someplace that hasn't been designed. So while it needs design, it needs an element of freedom. It needs an element of unpredictability, uncertainty, which now a lot of people don't like that. They don't, and I'm speaking now from the experience of introducing, like I've had occasion to introduce the concept of open space, you know, the open space meeting idea, something I love. I just love that. But crikey, there's an awful lot more people out there who hate that, don't know what we're starting with, don't know what we're finishing with, don't know what the outcome's going to be, don't know where it's going to go, don't know who's going to show up, who'll stay. Oh. So we need design, but we need freedom. How do we balance those as facilitators? What's the art of balancing those?
Well, and I think there's another important ingredient before we talk about how to balance those two, and that's all of the grunt work, right? All of the invitations, the reminders, the outreach, the asynchronous day-to-day stuff, which I think Myriam and her team are vastly better at than we are. But it's, you know, the automations and the things that make it possible for people to come in. So there's a huge amount of actual structure to the invitation and the curation of getting to the point where you can then have both a container for serendipity, right? But that's shaped well before you ever show up in the room to have a conversation. And that, you know, one thing I'm always surprised by, because I've been doing this forever, is that as the number of people who have no idea, you think for sure it's completely obvious. Obviously, there are things here. Obviously, you can come to a workshop. We've been doing this for years. Of course, they're free. Please come talk to us. You know, no clue, as if you have never spoken to them ever before. So even when we have these groups and they come together in these beautiful ways, for them to land there have been so many small points of engagement, email, social media, whatever, before that even happens. So,
Myriam, thoughts on that? That's, there's
+1, totally agree that we tend, and I think it's similar. And then I would like to give the ball back to Elise to hear about her thoughts on the balancing. But maybe just to add on what you've said, or to put it into different words, it's similar to how we prepare a workshop or any conversation anyway. There is, I think, 80% of the work happens before we come together in the same place. It's what is the purpose for us to meet in the first place? How do we invite those to come into the space, as Elise said, to make sure that everyone feels included and as if they have a role. And then it comes to small things like welcoming participants into the space. So is there maybe some music that is played? Is there someone who welcomes you with your name? Is there a person smiling? So I think we underestimate how much atmosphere and warmth we can create through a screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So how do you balance it, Elise? Well, I mean, absolutely. I think all of those things for sure. And the other design aspect of balancing this curated opportunity is to make sure that the opportunity is varied. So the way that I facilitate, if you've ever been in a workshop with me, is fairly directed and high energy and fast. So the number one piece of feedback I always get is slow down, give us more time, yada, yada. Well, there are other workshops where they do that, right? And so we intentionally pull in people who are, deep meditative, well of the soul kind of journeyers. And as long as you're welcomed in, and in community, I think one of the other things that the welcome in and then releasing, the releasing of expectation. So I found it a little frustrating, I will admit. So all my dear community members who do this, just know I'm working hard to roll with, but they will show up 20 minutes late sometimes, right? Like that is a releasing of control to say, okay, well, this person's 20 minutes late, but they've shown up and now they're in. I'm not going to catch them up, but we'll see what happens, and we're going to be okay with it, right? So creating different kinds of opportunities, different kinds of containers, releasing some of the control of how people come into and out of them, I think allows for lots of different maps of possibility.
But it's releasing control, but retaining some sense of order.
Structure.
I was trying to think of a word but structure is a really good word for that. So it's, sorry, Myriam.
And to build on that, I think what is important is to allow for different personality types and preferences to contribute in their preferred way. So to recognize there are think to speakers and speak to thinkers. I think Elise and I were rather the speak to thinkers. Everything is a little bit faster than usual. And still we are aware that there are some participants who just need a moment of silence to think about whatever they want to say next first before being thrown into a breakout room. And I think to create the space where serendipity and where the wisdom of the group can emerge is also to recognize that in the online space, we do have restrictions that we need to design around. So for instance, when I'm in a physical space with 300 people, it is intimidating also to raise my hand, maybe even less intimidating or more intimidating. But what I will do is I first turn to my neighbor and make sure that what I'm about to say is not totally stupid. Or I will exchange a glance with someone. And when we are online, we don't have this opportunity unless it is provided by the facilitator. And I think very often we forget that we do need this little bit of a safety cushion. That when we're asking a group of, even if it's only 6 people, if we're inviting them to raise their voice and contribute in a way, how can we give them the opportunity to just reassure themselves that what they're about to say is not totally stupid?
Yeah. Actually, one of our previous guests had a wonderful expression, I think, to cover that. And he talked about liminal space. And the concept, he said, when we're in the room together, when we're in work together, we all share the same liminal space, which is the space surrounding this particular event, activity, group interaction, where we can all see and hear largely the same liminal environment that we're in. But when we're online, all of that is taken, all that commonality that can contain us is gone. Because all of us individually have a totally different space in the background within which we're working. Some of us have a live background. Some of us have a screen background. But what's outside the door? Are there dogs barking? Are there children playing? Are there adults rowing? So that liminal space, Myriam, I think is the key point, or at least that's what I'm inferring from what you're saying. That idea of liminal space online versus live is fundamentally different. And now the facilitator has a key role to play in the online piece to help create a liminal space that's shared, that's common, that people can collectively relate to. Is that a fair observation, do you think, or is that overstating it?
I think that's fascinating, because I think it's overstated. I think in person, yes, the space is created more explicitly for you. Mm-hmm. You know, so liminality is the transition from one to another, right? We're moving, we're not this nor that in between. And portals are a really great way to think about it. When you walk through, and which is why banks and justice halls and churches have these amazing portals. You walk through and you are in another space. The best tiki bars, amazing portals. You go in and you escape. And you can do that in the physical world with the space itself, for sure. But what that is doing is it's changing your perception of where to direct your attention, what the intentionality of your demeanor needs to be. Some spaces you walk into and you are supposed to be fun. Some spaces you walk into and you are supposed to be reverent, right? And how you are meant to interact or relate to the other people around you. That part of it, the intention, the attention, and the interpersonal energy are absolutely achievable online and directable online by a well-facilitated entry, and then ended online with a well-facilitated close. Those are the portals that bring us into a liminally shared space, which is why I think all facilitation communities have strong bookends, whether we try to or not. You just can't help it.
Excellent.
And I think to connect the two views is that when we host online, we tend to forget that the space is always the same. So we don't have these portals, or even we don't walk from one meeting room to the next. So whenever I close our conversation now, and then right afterwards, I'm in a conversation with someone else, my brain will think that I'm still in the same place. So as a facilitator or host, how can I create this transition intentionally to what is the equivalent of the arc, of the portal, of the welcome area that I can create in one way or another to make the transition easier, to facilitate the transition to my guests?
So there's three parts to the facilitation role, whether we're online or virtual, that are common, that are shared. There's the creating that entry from wherever all the participants are coming to bring them into a shared space. There's then facilitating the event inside that portal. And then there's the wrap it all up, put a package bow around it, send them on their way, and leave something emergent behind us. There's three very different characteristics or what's the word? They're characteristics or features of facilitation. Is that a fair observation?
Absolutely. And one thing that comes to my mind is this departure part, also to link it back to community. I think that very often suddenly time is over and we need to wrap it up, and then it's finished, and then we close Zoom and we're back home alone. And this can be quite disturbing, especially when we are in a session that goes very deep, where we feel very connected, where we literally forget that there is a screen between us. So we have this warm glow feeling of being in community, and suddenly it's over and we're back. So there's also an art of creating this transition. And then I think the beauty of community comes in that even after the session ended, we can come back and reconnect to those who have experienced the same with us, to make sense out of it, or to expand the time from leaving that space and re-entering our reality.
Okay, so is that a key characteristic of community? Is time that it's not an event. An event can be facilitated, but when you facilitate a community, you're facilitating not just single isolated events. You're facilitating something over time, and then it's that handing over or handing on or passing to the next event that over time, that's what builds the sense of community. So the community facilitator has to be cognizant of that time dimension. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's clearly time crafting, right? You know, how do you shape the experience of our time together? Yeah. And I think the other key craft there is energy, right? So part of the reason we talk about the events as the community thing we focus on the most is that of the kinds of energy you can expend on making things happen, interpersonal energy, the one that we get from being together, interacting, and expending our energy to connect with somebody else and build something, is the only one that's generative. It's the only one that you can spend and then get more energetic from having spent energy. Yeah. Right. Whereas all of the others, you know, all of the emails and the posts and the comments and the likes and the here's my picture of how clever I am, all of those things are expenditures of energy to read, expenditures to comment, you know, and that doesn't mean they don't then have value at the end, but they are generative in the same way. So a true community comes together, and you know, that serendipitous timecraft is part of creating energy that ideally then builds and spawns off more opportunities for more energy. How cool is it that you can spend more and get more in this way?
So it's a, what's the word? It's a guaranteed it's an investment with a guaranteed better return. That's.
I don't know if it's guaranteed. I mean,
I thought I might be pushing it just to the edge.
Yeah. But you got a pretty good shot at it. That's for sure. You know, if you craft those entries, you craft that container in a way that invites people to share of themselves. Yeah. This is what Myriam was talking about before. You go to the community, you have 300 people, and they're asked to just observe and comment. Yeah. They are not investing any energy that can then build or feed anyone else. Yeah. And they don't walk out better necessarily as a result.
And I think where the guarantee comes in, I was wondering, why does it itch? And there are moments, so when I come in with best intentions and I open up and I show my vulnerable self, and then I end up in a breakout room with someone who's dismissive, who doesn't listen, and who judges me. This is definitely not a positive return on my investment. Yeah. Not a guaranteed multiplier of my well-being. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, again, where community then comes in, because yes, it's beautiful. It's all hunky-glory while it works. how do you as a community builder, community facilitator, enforce and reinforce the culture and behaviors you want to see? And how do you deal with situations where you observe behaviors that you don't want to see? And I think these are the make it or break it moments. And I remember that we had very long conversations, and we went through our storming phase at Never Done Before when it came to the concept of psychological safety and what does it mean for everyone to feel safe in a workshop, and what is the responsibility of the facilitator and of the participant, and how do we own our triggers, especially in a context where we are constantly exposing ourselves to stuff we've never done before. So we are very often out of our comfort zone, and we don't necessarily know what we can trigger in others. And I think through these conversations that weren't always comfortable, we shaped the culture that we now have, and the trust that it is actually a positive investment and return on this investment.
But Elise, you said two things and you used two expressions that I found intriguing: time crafting and energy crafting. And both of those expressions are really different. But what flooded into my head when you used those and when you explained what you meant by them was, I go back to some of my own research on the meeting space, this idea of there's a systemic output that wasn't part of the planned input, which means we're getting more than the sum of all the parts. In that facilitated community, we get this in systems thinking, it's called the emergent output. It's the unexpected, it's the added value, it's the extra piece that's more than if we just add up all the individual pieces. That's the added bit. Is that really where facilitated community kind of tips us into a slightly new dimension on the absolutely positive side of the scale? But it's this thing of and that's what I meant by I invest, but I'm always going to get more than what I invested. Now, that's the time crafting piece. And then we have to deal with the negativity. Myriam, you made the point, if I go into a breakout and I'm not in pleasant company and it doesn't fit with what I expect or what I hope for, but now the facilitator has to manage that over time to ensure that the community values, ethos, culture are being protected, preserved, so that we hold on to all the good stuff, and the negative stuff, well, that needs another community someplace else.
Or the negative stuff needs to be energetically rechanneled, right? Yes. So, she was talking about psychological safety and risk taking, and, energetically, we're not always all in a great spot from day to day. You can show up in a breakout room and be a lousy partner because, you ate something wrong that morning. I mean,
bad hair day, yeah.
Exactly, right? It's too early. Whatever it could be. So the guidelines and guardrails that are in place, if you are intentional about it and you have the kinds of work that Myriam's done with the NDB community to identify the practices of psychological safety, mean that you can notice and address in the moment and reshape that energy as quickly as possible. But you have to have those in place to recognize it, right? Like there are certain things that we can't see until the words for them have been shared with us. And I think that's one of the key things for community development is giving your community the language and the eyes to be able to see that kind of energy and speak to it in a way that helps either redirect it or direct it elsewhere.
Well, guys, there's one thing that's for certain. The art of facilitation has not given any of us the power to expand time. Much as we would love to, we are in discussion for 47 minutes, believe it or not.
Need to wrap up. And Martin, I would like to give you a break while you do the brilliant summary and summarize your notes and ask a final question to these two ladies.
Good, absolutely.
To have them here. I've learned so much from this conversation, and I'm sure our viewers too. But we are here facing two communities. We have two of the most renowned communities in facilitation. And one of them, NDB, is in Europe. The other one in the US. I wonder how much the container, the fact that the continents where you are apart have an impact on the kind of communities you are hosting, right? Because on one end, I see, for instance, let's imagine this. If we ask in Europe, a random meeting participant, how many times have you attended a facilitated meeting? So I wonder, what is the facilitated meeting market share in Europe versus US, right? Who is getting the win, and how this impacts on your communities?
Our communities are online, so they are international. You know, Myriam's in Europe, I'm in the US, but I don't believe that our communities are isolated in any way. Mm-hmm. In fact, trying to find a time that's happy for my European, South American, South African, and Australian folks to all show up at the same workshop is a minor nightmare.
So, that's you're in Pacific, Elise.
You just need to move to Ireland, Elise. That solves that problem for you.
There you go.
But honestly, who is in the lead in terms of market share for facilitated meetings, Myriam? Is it the US or it's Europe?
I'm not sure what you mean by that, because for me it boils down to, so for a normal standard weekly meeting, you would not hire an external facilitator. So I would assume that your question implies to what extent those who host meetings, meaning team leaders or managers, actually have facilitation skills.
Correct. Where are we leading, Europe or US?
And then I wonder whether it's really a question of geography or whether of industry, whether there's some companies in specific industries where there's a larger share of individuals who would have facilitation skills and these emotional intelligence to host group conversations with their colleagues. Did I avoid your question?
Experience.
Good point.
Yeah.
Point. Thanks.
Yeah, Elise, what's your take?
Yeah, I think that's totally true. I think it's completely dependent on the organizational type and culture. Right? I've seen some giant companies that have not a lick of facilitation distributed throughout, and some that actually make that quite a core focus of how they train up all of their anybody in any kind of supervisory role. So, and they're international, right? So the boundaries are not geographical in terms of how we connect.
It depends on the organizational culture. So what do you really want everyone to participate in a meeting? Or do you just want to read out your memo? And then I recently interviewed a diplomat on my podcast on the importance of facilitation in politics and diplomatic conversations. And there you would have, and I was somehow shocked, naively shocked, that in politics they wouldn't have meeting facilitators, but there is a host of a meeting, a chair of a meeting. And this means that, they're chairing the meeting. It's not a facilitator. And then I wonder, what is the impact on global politics if these global leaders are meeting without a meeting facilitator?
Actually, one thing I've been looking for, and if there's anybody who's listening, the community that I host is the Meeting Innovation Community, and we have been seeking parliamentarians to come and share with us what you do, because that is a branch of very alive meeting leadership that I think facilitators need to understand better and be able to work with better. So parliamentarians, you are invited, come play.
Let's put on a call. We are here a number of viewers right now. I think we have 8 viewers at live right now, but this will be watched by many others. So let's see how you get some clients there, Elise.
Well, then clients, it's totally free opportunity, which actually there's one question you didn't ask that I was hoping you might ask, and maybe I could ask it to Myriam.
Okay.
What is the name of your community? How do you join?
The name of my community is Never Done Before, neverdonebefore.org. And we have onboarding sequences, so it's in cohorts. The next opportunity to join is in December/January. And what is the name of your community, Elise, and how can one join?
So I host the Meeting Innovation Community, which is an entirely free community that you can join by going to meetinginnovation.community. In case anybody was wondering.
I call it the self-facilitated meeting.
Brilliant.
Martin, over to you to sum up and golden nuggets by participant.
It'll have to be a really quick one, Paul. We started with two introvert facilitators, which was a remarkable place to start that we didn't expect, which was fantastic. But that doesn't make it mutually exclusive to the art of facilitation. So we kind of touched then into community. What do we mean by community? And kind of like organization, but not quite. So community is bounded by shared values, shared culture, shared experience, which then brought us into the concept of virtual versus the physical. And we identified that facilitation in those two spaces might happen a little bit differently. But there are three key elements that are shared in virtually every facilitated event. There's create the portal to bring people into, from wherever they've come, to bring them into that shared community space. There's then the event. So we facilitate to do whatever it is we're doing in there. And then there's so now we have to return to where we previously were. So it's the facilitating the exit and return. But really significantly, and this is the next key part I think that came out of the conversation, the community then must live on over time to be a community. And the joining from the last event to the next event is a key part of that facilitation to build on, to preserve the underlying culture, but then to build on it so that we become a kind of a growing community. So part of that then demands that it needs to be designed, but it doesn't need to be bound. It has to have enough framework and structure to be accessible, but it equally has to have enough flexibility and fluidity to accommodate, and then to expand where the community is ultimately going to take it. There's the power of preparations then became the center of our conversation. And actually, and Myriam, I think you mentioned that about 80% of the facilitative effort can go into the foundations. It's a bit like a building, and before a building ever gets visible, there might be 6 months of work and hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in foundations that will never be seen. But without them, there will be no building enduring. So that idea of preparation is so intrinsic to the facilitation of community. I really loved the idea of time crafting and energy crafting. And Elise, you particularly mentioned both of those concepts. And this time crafting is creating and holding that space, not just in the event, but actually over time. And the energy crafting then is to optimize the different energies, whether it's contemplative or whether it's projective or whether it's verbose or whatever it is, but to harness the energies that the different participants bring to the individual event, but then ultimately bring to the wider community. I know that I've left stuff out. We've touched on a whole lot of stuff, but I hope that does some justice to the real richness of the conversation that we've had. And I'm really grateful for being part of it, because it was really, really enjoyable, I have to say.
Fantastic summary as always, Martin. Golden nuggets from you ladies, Myriam, Elise, what did you take away from this conversation? And we close our show for today.
I like talking to fun people about facilitation and communities. That's mine. Hooray, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed both to build on Elise's experience as a fellow community builder and leader, and at Martin's questions and provocations of where does facilitation come in, and what is it that we actually do that somehow, I think for an external view, often remains unnoticed. So thank you for bringing this out through your moderation and question asking skills.
Pleasure.
Real pleasure. Thank you everybody for following us. It's great to see after so much this amount of time, we're still having 8 dedicated viewers here in LinkedIn and also YouTube, Facebook, I wonder. Thank you so much, and stay tuned for next episodes in November, and then we have a special one in December, the Video Collaboration Festival. No, I don't use that word, that will be still something else, but it will be something about video collaboration, and we would like to have experimentation. So maybe Myriam and Elise, if you have a video collaboration platform, you're more than welcome to join us again. And in the meantime, stay tuned, and thank you for watching us.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.
Okay, then.
We left us with the live stream.
Should we make it stop now that we have buttons?
So the recording and custom the live stream.
But it was never recording, I think.
Yeah, he was recording.
Stop live stream. Shall I stop the live stream?
No, let's stop the recording. Let's say yes, but the live stream is still there. Talk to me. Talk to me.
Welcome back, Paul. Well, and I have this vague memory of being asked to see if I could stick around for questions. Is that a real memory, or is that a dream? No,
that's a real memory, but Paul will have to enlighten us about that one. Paul, are we still live?
Okay, so let me tell you what's happening. It's that we are still live.
Yay!
Because I was dropped out of the meeting, and we are always learning. And now I'm no longer the host. So Myriam is the host.
So do you want me to stop the live stream then?